A message from Jesus to your heart to heal your relationship with money and fulfill your purpose. There is a quiet tension many believers carry but rarely confess. You love God. You want to trust Him. You believe He provides. And yet, when the subject of money comes close, something tightens inside you. Fear rises, guilt whispers, confusion settles in. You wonder whether wanting financial peace means you are less spiritual, less faithful, less surrendered. Jesus knows this conflict intimately. He sees how deeply money has shaped your worries, your decisions, your sense of security. He knows how often you prayed with sincerity but also with fear, asking God to provide while secretly bracing yourself for disappointment. And He is not distant from that struggle. He steps directly into it. This message is not about getting rich. It is not about formulas, promises, or shortcuts. It is about healing the way your heart relates to money. Healing the wounds created by lack, pressure, shame, or comparison. Healing the silent belief that faith and provision must exist in conflict. Somewhere along the way, money stopped being a tool and started becoming a burden. It became something you feared losing, something you felt guilty desiring, or something you believed would finally fix what feels unsettled inside you. And that inner tension slowly pulled your heart in opposite directions, wanting to serve God fully, but also wanting to feel safe, wanting purpose, but also stability, wanting faith, but fearing lack. Jesus does not shame you for that. He understands it. He knows that money touches survival, dignity, responsibility, and provision for those you love. He also knows how easily the heart can confuse dependence on God with anxiety disguised as wisdom. So He speaks gently but clearly. Your relationship with money affects your relationship with purpose. When money becomes the source of fear, purpose becomes blurred. When money becomes the source of security, purpose becomes secondary. But when money is healed in the heart, purpose begins to breathe again. Jesus is not asking you to ignore financial reality. He's asking you to stop letting fear define it. He's not asking you to reject provision. He's asking you to receive it without losing your soul. He wants to free you from guilt-driven faith and anxiety-driven decisions. What if the reason money has felt so heavy is not because God wants you to struggle, but because He wants to heal what money has been doing inside you? What if provision has been delayed, not to punish you, but to realign your heart with trust before increase? What if prosperity was never meant to replace purpose, but to serve it? In this moment, Jesus is not inviting you to chase more. He is inviting you to heal first, to let Him touch the fears you never say out loud, to let Him correct the lies you learned through pain or pressure, to let Him redefine prosperity in a way that brings peace, not control. Because money was never meant to master you. It was meant to serve what God is doing through you. And when your heart is healed, provision stops being a threat and starts becoming a tool in God's hands. Stay here. Listen closely. What Jesus is about to reveal can change not only how you see money, but how you walk into your purpose with freedom and peace. Money did not become a source of guilt overnight. It happened slowly, through experiences that shaped how you learned to survive. Maybe you grew up watching fear control every financial decision. Maybe lack taught you that wanting more was dangerous. Or maybe faith was presented to you in a way that made poverty look holy and provision feel suspicious. Over time, those lessons settled deep inside your heart. You learned to associate money with tension instead of peace, with pressure instead of freedom, with shame instead of stewardship. You prayed for provision, but felt conflicted when it came. You wondered if desiring financial stability meant you were drifting from God. And that inner conflict created a quiet guilt that followed you even in moments of gratitude. Jesus sees how heavy that guilt has been. He knows how often you questioned yourself, how you felt uncomfortable talking about money in prayer, how you judged your own heart for wanting security, even when your responsibilities were real. He knows that guilt distorted the way you listen to God, making you interpret silence as disapproval and delay as punishment. But Jesus never taught that provision was sinful. He never taught that lack was proof of holiness. He taught dependence, not deprivation, trust, not fear. Guilt did not come from him. It came from wounds, misinterpretations, and survival patterns that formed when provision felt uncertain. When money is tied to guilt, peace disappears. Every decision feels heavy. Every desire feels suspect. You hesitate to ask God boldly because you are unsure if He approves. That hesitation does not come from humility. It comes from fear, and fear has never been the language of faith. Jesus reminds you that God is not offended by your need for provision. He knows you live in a world where bills exist, responsibilities exist, and caring for others costs something. Wanting stability does not make you less spiritual, it makes you human. What matters is not whether you desire provision, but whether that desire replaces trust. Guilt has a way of silencing honest prayer. You stop bringing your real concerns to God and start filtering them. You ask for enough, but not too much. You say you trust, but remain anxious. And slowly, money becomes a place where faith feels fragile instead of secure. Jesus wants to heal that fracture. He wants you to know that provision was always meant to flow through trust, not tension. God does not ask you to deny your needs. He asks you to bring them to Him without shame. Guilt blocks intimacy. Trust restores it. You were never meant to carry financial anxiety alone, nor were you meant to punish yourself for wanting peace. Jesus invites you to lay down the belief that struggle proves devotion. He teaches you that peace is a fruit of alignment, not evidence of compromise. When guilt is removed, clarity begins to return. You start making decisions from wisdom instead of fear. You stop equating scarcity with faithfulness. You begin to understand that God cares deeply about how provision affects your heart, not just your bank account. Jesus is not trying to take money away from you. He is trying to take guilt away from your relationship with it. Because as long as guilt leads, peace cannot follow. And without peace, purpose feels distorted. Healing begins when you allow yourself to believe that God wants to provide without controlling you, bless without corrupting you, and guide without shaming you. Money does not have to be a source of fear or guilt. In Christ, it can become a place where trust grows and peace settles. And once that guilt loosens its grip, the heart becomes ready to understand the next truth Jesus wants to reveal about provision and purpose. Jesus never said that money was evil. He said that the love of money could become a master. And there is a difference that changes everything. Money itself is neutral. It does not corrupt the heart. It reveals what already governs it. Jesus separates provision from greed so you can finally breathe without confusion. Greed is not wanting to have enough. Greed is wanting money to give you what only God can give. Identity, security, control. When money becomes the place where you look for safety, it slowly replaces trust. When money becomes the measure of your worth, it quietly takes the place of grace. Jesus does not warn you about having resources. He warns you about being ruled by them. Provision, on the other hand, flows from relationship. It comes with peace, not obsession. It allows generosity without fear. It creates margin instead of anxiety. Jesus teaches you that provision is meant to serve life, not dominate it. When money serves, it supports purpose. When money rules, it distorts purpose. Many people confuse desire with greed because they were never taught to distinguish them. Desire asks, "Can I steward this well?" Greed asks, "How much can I keep?" Desire is open-handed. Greed is clenched. Desire is grateful. Greed is never satisfied. Jesus invites you to examine not what you want, but why you want it. You may have feared that prosperity would change you. that having more would pull your heart away from God. Jesus understands that fear. That is why he does not simply give increase. He heals the heart first, because money does not create pride. It amplifies what is already there. When humility leads, provision strengthens faith. When insecurity leads, provision magnifies fear. Jesus also knows that lack can become a master just as easily as wealth. When fear of not having enough controls your decisions, money still rules your heart, even if you have very little. Greed is not about amount, it is about authority. And Jesus calls you back to freedom, not excess or deprivation. He teaches you to hold money without clinging to it, to use it without depending on it, to receive it without letting it define you. This is the freedom of provision under his lordship. Money becomes a servant, not a savior, a resource, not a refuge. When provision is surrendered to Jesus, it stops competing with purpose. You no longer ask whether God approves of your needs. You ask how your resources can reflect his heart. Generosity becomes natural, not forced. Trust becomes steady, not conditional. Peace becomes the signpost that your heart is aligned. Jesus is not calling you to fear money. He is calling you to remove it from the throne. When he is Lord, provision finds its proper place. It no longer promises what it cannot deliver. It simply supports the life God is building through you. This separation brings relief. You stop swinging between guilt and ambition. You stop measuring faith by lack or success. You begin to see money as a tool that responds to wisdom and obedience, not as a power that controls your future. When Jesus separates provision from greed, he restores balance, and balance creates clarity. From that clarity, purpose can grow without pressure. And as your heart settles into this truth, you become ready to face the deeper wounds that shaped how you learned to survive financially. Your relationship with money did not begin with numbers. It began with experiences. Moments when lack created fear. Moments when loss created insecurity. Moments when provision felt uncertain and survival became the priority. Those moments left marks, even if you never named them as wounds. Jesus sees those places clearly, and he does not rush past them. Some of the decisions you make today are not about wisdom. They are about protection. You hold tightly because you once had nothing. You fear spending because loss taught you caution. You overwork because instability taught you that rest is dangerous. None of that makes you faithless. It makes you human. And Jesus approaches those patterns with compassion, not correction. Money wounds are often silent. They hide behind responsibility, discipline, and planning. But underneath there is fear. Fear of repeating the past, fear of failing those who depend on you, fear of being vulnerable again. Those fears quietly shape your choices and limit your peace. Jesus does not ignore them. He invites you to bring them into the light. Healing does not start with more income. It starts with honesty. Jesus asks you to notice where fear, shame, or control has been driving you. He knows that until the wound is healed, provision will always feel fragile. Even abundance will not feel safe when the heart expects loss. Some of the shame you carry around money was never yours to bear. Words spoken over you, failures you internalized, situations you did not choose. Those moments taught you lies about your worth, your ability, and God's care. Jesus speaks truth over those lies. He reminds you that your value was never tied to your income, your success, or your past mistakes. He also knows that wounds distort trust. When provision hurt you, trusting God with provision feels risky. So you compensate. You plan excessively. You control outcomes. You stay guarded. Jesus does not tear those defenses down abruptly. He heals what is underneath so they are no longer needed. As healing begins, something shifts inside you. Decisions become calmer. Anxiety loses intensity. You stop reacting from fear and start responding from wisdom. Money stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling manageable. Not because everything changed externally, but because something changed internally. Jesus does not promise instant increase. He promises restoration. Restoration of trust. Restoration of peace. Restoration of freedom. When the wound heals, the heart no longer needs money to protect it. And when money no longer protects the heart, God can entrust more without harm. This is where true healing takes place. Not in the numbers, but in the soul. Jesus restores what fear distorted. He replaces survival with stewardship, control with trust, shame with grace. And from that healed place, your relationship with money becomes lighter, clearer, and aligned with purpose. As those wounds lose their grip, you become ready to understand a deeper truth. Provision follows purpose, not the other way around. And Jesus is about to show you why alignment always comes before increase. Purpose has always come before provision, not because God withholds, but because He builds in order. Jesus knows how easy it is to reverse that order, to believe that once money is secure, then purpose will follow. That once provision arrives, peace will come. That once financial pressure lifts, obedience will feel easier. But Jesus gently corrects this belief, because it places weight on provision that it was never meant to carry. God does not fund confusion. He sustains calling. When purpose is unclear, provision often feels unstable. Not as punishment, but as protection. Jesus teaches you that money responds to alignment. When the heart is centered on what God is forming in you, provision finds a place to flow without damaging the soul. Many people ask God to bless what He never assigned. They chase income without direction, opportunities without calling, growth without grounding. Jesus does not condemn this. He reveals why it feels exhausting. Provision disconnected from purpose creates pressure. It demands constant effort to maintain what was never anchored in obedience. Purpose gives context to provision. It answers the question of why resources are needed. Without that context, money becomes either something you cling to or something you fear losing. But when purpose is clear, money becomes a servant. It supports what God is doing instead of competing with it. Jesus reminds you that God always reveals direction before He supplies increase. Not the full map, but the next faithful step. When that step is taken, provision meets obedience, sometimes quietly, sometimes gradually, but always intentionally. God does not rush provision into a heart that is still searching for identity and outcomes. This is why some seasons feel financially tight, even when you are faithful. God may be refining your understanding of purpose. He may be narrowing your focus. He may be teaching you to depend on Him daily, rather than leaning on resources for security. These seasons are not empty, they are formative. Purpose also protects you from misuse. When you know why God is providing, you are less likely to let provision define you. You steward instead of consume. You give instead of hoard. You plan without fear. Jesus wants provision to strengthen your walk, not distract it. You may have been asking God for more when He has been inviting you to align deeper, not because He is withholding blessing, but because He is preparing you to carry it well. Purpose clarifies motive. It purifies desire. It ensures that when provision comes, it builds rather than breaks. Jesus does not ask you to figure out your entire calling before He provides. He asks you to remain faithful where you are. Purpose often begins quietly, in ordinary obedience, unseen faithfulness, small acts of trust. Provision meets those moments, not with excess, but with sufficiency. When purpose leads, anxiety loses its grip. You stop asking, "Will I have enough?" and start asking, "Am I aligned?" And that question changes everything, because when alignment comes first, provision no longer feels uncertain. It becomes part of God's care, not a constant source of fear. Jesus wants you to know that you are not failing because provision feels slow. You are being formed. And formation always precedes increase. When purpose is rooted in Him, provision will arrive at the right measure at the right time, without costing you peace. There are seasons when money feels limited, no matter how carefully you plan, no matter how faithfully you pray. And in those moments, a painful question often rises. Why would God allow this? Why would He withhold something so necessary? Jesus does not avoid this question. He answers it with honesty, because misunderstanding this season can quietly damage the heart. Not every lack is an attack. Not every closed door is opposition. Some limits exist because God is protecting you from becoming someone you were never meant to be. Jesus knows how easily provision can shape identity before character is formed. He knows how quickly money can amplify insecurity, pride, or dependence if the heart is not anchored first. There are times when God slows provision to guard intimacy. When resources are few, prayer becomes honest. Dependence becomes daily. Trust becomes real, not theoretical. Jesus is not impressed by faith that only exists when everything is comfortable. He values faith that remains when answers are delayed and resources feel uncertain. You may not see it, but some of the restraint you experienced saved you from harm. It protected you from building your confidence on income instead of grace. It kept you from mistaking success for calling. It prevented you from running faster than your soul could follow. God is patient enough to delay increase until your heart is strong enough to carry it without losing peace. Jesus also knows that money can become a refuge without you noticing. When provision comes too quickly, it can replace prayer. When abundance comes without grounding, it can silence dependence. God does not withhold to punish. He withholds to preserve what matters most: your relationship with Him. Some seasons of lack were invitations to examine what you trusted. Did peace disappear when provision tightened? Did fear grow louder than faith? Those reactions were not failures. They were revelations. They showed where healing and alignment were still needed. Jesus uses these moments not to shame you, but to free you. God is far more concerned with who you become than what you accumulate. He would rather form humility than fund pride. He would rather deepen trust than accelerate comfort. Jesus sees beyond the moment. He knows what unhealed patterns could do if provision arrived too soon. You may have interpreted delay as rejection, but delay often means care. It means God is refusing to let money damage your soul. He is refusing to let provision outrun character. He is choosing long-term peace over short-term relief. Jesus does not promise constant ease. He promises faithful presence. He promises that nothing withheld is meant to harm you. Everything He allows or delays is filtered through love. Even when it is difficult to understand, His restraint carries intention. When this truth settles in your heart, something changes. You stop resenting the season. You start learning from it. You stop measuring God's goodness by income and start recognizing it by His nearness. Fear loosens, trust grows, peace returns gradually, and as the heart heals, limits begin to make sense. Provision no longer feels like a test. It feels like timing, and timing is never random in God's hands. Jesus wants you to know that He is not keeping you from good. He is keeping good from costing you your soul. And when protection has finished its work, provision will come without stealing your peace. Fear of not having enough has a way of following you everywhere. Even when things are stable, the thought lingers in the background. What if this changes? What if it runs out? What if I am one mistake away from losing everything? Jesus sees how this fear quietly shapes your decisions, your sleep, your prayers, and even your faith. This fear did not come from nowhere. It was learned. It grew in moments when provision felt uncertain, when responsibility felt heavier than resources, when you realized how fragile stability can be. Over time, that fear stopped being a reaction and started becoming a mindset. You began planning not from peace, but from anxiety, saving not from wisdom, but from dread, working not from purpose, but from the pressure to survive. Jesus speaks gently into that place. He reminds you that fear of lack is not solved by accumulation. You can have more and still be afraid. You can earn more and still feel insecure. Because the fear is not about money, it is about trust. And trust cannot be stored in accounts or protected by numbers. When fear leads, it distorts perspective. You begin to see every expense as a threat, every delay as danger, every pause as risk. Gratitude shrinks, joy becomes conditional, peace feels temporary. Jesus does not want you living under that weight. He did not save you so that your heart would remain trapped in constant worry. He teaches you daily dependence, not anxious preparation. This does not mean irresponsibility. It means learning to trust God one day at a time instead of trying to control tomorrow before it arrives. Fear wants guarantees. Faith walks without them. Jesus does not promise that you will never face uncertainty. He promises that you will never face it alone. You may have believed that worrying proves responsibility, that fear keeps you alert, that anxiety protects you from failure, but fear does not protect, it exhausts. It narrows vision, it steals peace long before anything is actually lost. Jesus invites you to lay that burden down, not because provision is guaranteed, but because His presence is. Healing this fear begins when you stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios and start recognizing daily faithfulness. Notice how God has carried you through moments you once thought would break you. Notice how provision came in ways you did not expect. Notice how you are still here, still sustained, still breathing, still held. Jesus reminds you that your life is worth more than what you consume or produce. He calls you back to the truth that God knows what you need before you ask. This does not remove effort or planning. It removes panic. It replaces survival mode with stewardship. It allows you to act wisely without being driven by fear. As this fear heals, something shifts in your relationship with money. You stop clenching and start holding with open hands. You stop hoarding and start trusting. You stop measuring safety by amounts and start measuring it by obedience. Peace returns, not because everything is abundant, but because your heart is no longer ruled by the question of enough. Jesus does not shame you for fearing lack. He understands it. He lived among people who worried daily about provision. But He consistently pointed them to the same truth. Seek first the kingdom, and everything else finds its place, not all at once, not without effort, but without fear ruling the heart. When trust replaces anxiety, decisions become clearer. You give without panic. You save without obsession. You work without burning out. You rest without guilt. Fear loses its authority because it no longer defines your future. Jesus is not asking you to ignore reality. He is asking you to stop letting fear interpret it. Provision flows best in a heart that trusts daily, not one that constantly anticipates loss. And as this fear loosens its grip, you become ready to see how prosperity was always meant to serve something greater than survival. Prosperity was never meant to stop with you. Jesus speaks this truth clearly because many hearts confuse blessing with arrival. They believe that once provision comes, the journey is complete. But in the kingdom of God, provision is not a destination. It is a responsibility, and how it is used reveals who it truly serves. When prosperity serves the ego, it isolates. It creates distance between you and others. It feeds comparison and quietly reshapes identity around status, control, and recognition. Even gratitude can become selective. Peace becomes conditional. Jesus knows how subtly this happens. That is why He never measures blessing by accumulation, but by impact. Prosperity that serves the kingdom looks different. It does not draw attention to itself. It flows outward. It becomes a channel, not a container. Jesus teaches that true abundance multiplies when it moves. It strengthens families, lifts burdens, restores dignity, and creates space for generosity without fear. This kind of prosperity begins in the heart. It begins when money no longer answers the question of who you are. When identity is secure in Christ, resources stop being used to prove worth. They are used to express love. Stewardship replaces ownership. Gratitude replaces entitlement. Jesus also reveals that kingdom-centered prosperity carries peace. There is no need to protect image or defend position. There is freedom to give quietly, to help without being seen, to invest without expecting applause. Ego-driven prosperity always demands recognition. Kingdom prosperity finds joy in obedience. You may have feared that prospering would pull your heart away from God. Jesus shows you that when the heart is surrendered, prosperity actually deepens faith. It becomes a way to participate in what God is doing rather than compete with Him. Money no longer distracts from purpose, it supports it. Prosperity that serves the kingdom also brings clarity. You begin to ask different questions. Not how much can I keep, but how can I steward this well? Not how does this elevate me, but how does this reflect Christ? These questions align the heart and guard it from drifting into self-centered ambition. Jesus reminds you that He never condemned wealth. He challenged hearts that trusted it. When money stops being a refuge, it can become a resource for healing, justice, generosity, and provision beyond your own life. This is why God looks at motive before increase. Not to restrict you, but to protect what He wants to do through you. When prosperity serves the kingdom, it also brings rest. There is no frantic striving to maintain an image, no constant fear of losing status, no pressure to keep proving success. You are free to enjoy what God provides without being owned by it. Free to give without fear. Free to live without comparison. Jesus invites you into this freedom. He does not ask you to reject prosperity. He asks you to submit it. When submitted, prosperity no longer competes with devotion. It becomes an extension of it. It amplifies generosity instead of insecurity. It strengthens trust instead of control. This is the prosperity that does not corrupt the soul. The prosperity that walks in humility. The prosperity that remains open-handed. The prosperity that remembers where it came from and where it is meant to go. And when money finally takes its place as a servant of the kingdom, not the ego, something powerful happens. Peace settles, purpose sharpens, and you become ready to experience the freedom that comes when money no longer masters the heart, but serves what God is building through you. Freedom begins when money stops speaking louder than God. For a long time, money may have dictated your choices, your fears, your sense of safety, not because you loved it, but because you needed it, because responsibility demanded it, because survival taught you to listen closely to its limits. And slowly, without intending to, money began to act like a master instead of a servant. Jesus confronts this not with condemnation, but with liberation. He shows you that money only gains authority when trust shifts away from God. When provision becomes the place you look for security, direction, or identity, it quietly takes the throne. And anything on the throne will eventually demand sacrifice. When money is a master, peace becomes conditional. Rest depends on numbers. Joy fluctuates with income. Fear grows whenever uncertainty appears. Even blessings feel fragile because you are constantly guarding them. Jesus does not want you living under that weight. He calls you back to a simpler order, where He leads and everything else follows. Making money a servant does not mean ignoring wisdom or responsibility. It means removing its power to define you. It means deciding, consciously and consistently, that money will support obedience, not replace it. That resources will follow values, not dictate them. That trust will remain rooted in God, even when provision feels uncertain. This shift happens internally before it shows externally. You begin noticing that decisions feel lighter. You stop asking what makes me safest and start asking what is right. You stop forcing outcomes and start trusting timing. Money no longer drives urgency. It responds to stewardship. Jesus teaches that where your treasure is, your heart follows. When the heart is anchored in Him, money naturally finds its place. It stops demanding your attention. It stops controlling your emotions. It stops shaping your worth. It becomes what it was always meant to be, a tool. As money loses authority, generosity becomes natural, not forced, not fearful. You give without anxiety because money no longer feels like your lifeline. You save without obsession because your future no longer rests solely on your control. You work diligently without burning out because your value is not tied to productivity alone. Jesus knows this freedom is learned, not instant. It grows as trust grows. Each act of obedience weakens money's grip. Each moment of dependence strengthens peace. Over time, fear loses credibility, control loosens, and faith becomes practical, not theoretical. When money serves, it brings order instead of chaos. It supports your calling instead of competing with it. It creates margin instead of pressure. It allows you to respond to needs without panic. This is not about how much you have. It is about who leads. Jesus does not promise that financial challenges disappear. He promises that they no longer rule you. When He is Lord, money answers to wisdom, not fear, to obedience, not anxiety, to purpose, not ego. This is where true freedom settles in. Not the absence of responsibility, but the presence of peace. Not the guarantee of abundance, but the assurance of guidance. Money no longer dictates your life. It simply supports the one God is building through you. And from this place of freedom, something deeper becomes possible. Work itself begins to change. No longer driven by survival alone, it becomes an expression of calling, faithfulness, and worship. And that shift changes everything. Work was never meant to consume your soul. It was never meant to drain your joy or define your worth. Yet for many people, work slowly became a place of survival rather than purpose. You work to pay bills. You work to avoid fear. You work to keep life from falling apart. And over time, work stops being meaningful and starts becoming heavy. Jesus sees this burden clearly, and He speaks into it with restoration. When work is driven by survival, it is ruled by pressure. There is always urgency, always fear of not doing enough, always the sense that rest must be earned and peace must wait. Survival work asks one question constantly: will this be enough? And that question never truly rests. Even success feels temporary when fear is driving the effort. Jesus never designed work to function that way. From the beginning, work was meant to be an expression of partnership with God, not a punishment. It was meant to reflect creativity, stewardship, and contribution. But when fear enters, work loses its original meaning and becomes transactional. You give your energy in exchange for security, hoping it will protect you. Jesus invites you into a different posture. He teaches that work becomes worship when it flows from trust instead of anxiety. Worship is not limited to prayer or song. Worship is any act done in obedience, gratitude, and surrender. When your heart is aligned with God, even ordinary tasks carry eternal weight. This does not mean that work suddenly becomes easy or always fulfilling. It means it becomes grounded. When work is worship, you no longer work to prove your value. You work because you already have it. You no longer chase approval. You serve with excellence because it reflects the one you belong to. When survival is the motive, work drains you. When worship is the motive, work strengthens you, even when it is demanding. The difference is not the task, it is the heart behind it. Jesus knows that many people burn out not because they work too much, but because they work disconnected from purpose and peace. Work becomes worship when you invite God into it daily. When decisions are guided by integrity instead of fear. When effort is offered as obedience, not desperation, when success is received with gratitude and failure is met with trust rather than shame. In that space, work stops threatening your soul. Jesus also restores the meaning of rest. When work is survival, rest feels dangerous. When work is worship, rest becomes sacred. You are no longer afraid to pause because your identity is not tied to productivity. You trust that God sustains even when you stop striving. Many people believe that purpose will someday replace work. Jesus shows that purpose often reveals itself within work. Faithfulness in small, unseen tasks shapes character. Diligence in ordinary responsibilities prepares the heart for greater influence. Work done with integrity builds trust that no opportunity can replace. Jesus does not promise that you will always love what you do. He promises that when you do it with Him, it will not empty you. When work is surrendered, it becomes a place where faith is practiced, patience is learned, and purpose is refined. You may have felt that your work has no spiritual value, that it is merely a means to survive. Jesus corrects that gently. He reminds you that nothing done in obedience is wasted. When your heart is aligned, even the unseen becomes significant. As work shifts from survival to worship, anxiety loosens its grip. You stop measuring your days by exhaustion and start recognizing meaning. You work diligently, but you no longer carry the weight alone. Peace returns not because circumstances changed, but because the motive did. This shift prepares you for what comes next, because when work is aligned with worship, obedience becomes clearer. And Jesus is about to reveal how obedience and provision are deeply connected in ways you may not have noticed before. Provision does not respond to ambition, it responds to obedience. This truth reshapes everything Jesus has been teaching you about money, work, and purpose. Many people believe that provision comes from effort alone, from strategy, from pushing harder or wanting more. But Jesus reveals a deeper pattern. God supplies where obedience creates alignment. Obedience is not dramatic, it is often quiet, ordinary and unseen. It looks like honesty when dishonesty would be easier. Faithfulness when recognition is absent. Integrity when compromise seems profitable. These moments rarely feel connected to provision at first, yet they create spiritual alignment, and alignment creates flow. Jesus never promised provision for every desire. He promised provision for what He leads. When you walk in obedience, you place yourself where God has already decided to sustain you. Provision meets direction, not instantly, not extravagantly, but faithfully. Enough arrives for the step you are taking, not for the future you are trying to control. Many people struggle financially not because they lack faith, but because their lives are divided. They ask God to bless paths they are unsure He chose. They want provision without surrender, direction without obedience. Jesus speaks clearly here. God does not finance independence from Him. He sustains trust. Obedience often feels costly at first. It may mean saying no to opportunities that promise quick gain, but compromise peace. It may mean choosing patience over urgency. It may mean giving when fear tells you to hold back. In those moments, provision may not increase immediately, but something else does. Peace, clarity, confidence that you are not walking alone. Jesus shows that provision is often released after obedience, not before it. The step comes first. The support follows. This is not punishment, it is relationship. God teaches you to trust His voice more than visible resources. When you move in obedience, even without guarantees, you discover that God is already there. Small obediences matter more than large intentions. The decision to act with integrity when no one is watching. The choice to honor God in how you earn, spend, and give. These moments shape your capacity to receive provision without fear or pride. Obedience builds spiritual muscle. It strengthens trust so that provision does not overwhelm the heart. Jesus also reveals that disobedience can quietly block provision, not as punishment, but as misalignment. When fear leads decisions, peace withdraws. When compromise enters, clarity fades. God does not abandon you, but the flow becomes strained. Provision feels harder because the heart is divided. When obedience becomes your priority, anxiety decreases. You stop obsessing over outcomes because you are focused on faithfulness. You trust that God will supply what obedience requires, not what ambition demands, but what calling needs. Provision connected to obedience carries peace. It does not arrive with panic or pressure. It feels timely, not rushed. It feels sufficient, not excessive. Jesus teaches you to recognize provision not by abundance alone, but by how it affects your heart. Does it deepen trust? Does it increase gratitude? Does it support obedience? As obedience becomes consistent, provision becomes dependable, not predictable in human terms, but reliable in God's hands. You begin to see patterns, needs met at the right moment, resources arriving through unexpected channels, strength given when finances are tight. These are not coincidences. They are responses to alignment. Jesus invites you to stop asking, "How can I secure my future?" and start asking, "Where is God leading me now?" Obedience keeps you present. It anchors you in today, where provision is available. Worry lives in the future. Obedience lives in the moment. When you walk obediently, you stop chasing provision and start trusting God's character. You discover that He is not trying to keep you dependent on money, but dependent on Him. And in that dependence, provision finds its proper place. This connection changes how you see money. It stops being something you chase and becomes something you steward. It stops being the goal and becomes the support. And as obedience continues shaping your life, Jesus prepares to speak directly to your heart about trust, provision, and the care He has for you personally. I know how heavy it has felt to carry responsibility without certainty. I know how often you tried to be strong when fear was quietly asking questions you did not want to answer. I see the moments when you trusted me publicly but worried privately, and I want you to hear this clearly. I've never stopped caring for you, and I have never been absent from your needs. You have wondered if I truly see your effort, if I notice how carefully you plan, how hard you work, how deeply you want to do what is right. I see it all. But I also see the weight you were never meant to carry alone, the fear of not having enough, the pressure to provide, the anxiety that comes when numbers do not line up the way you hoped. I do not judge you for that. I draw closer. I'm not asking you to ignore wisdom or responsibility. I'm asking you to trust me beyond them. Trust does not mean recklessness. It means relationship. It means allowing me to guide your decisions instead of fear guiding them for you. When you let fear lead, peace disappears. When you let me lead, peace remains even when answers are incomplete. You have looked at provision as something you must secure to feel safe. I want you to see it differently. Provision flows best when you walk with me, not when you run ahead of me. I do not promise excess, but I promise care. I do not promise ease, but I promise presence. And my presence has always been enough to sustain you. You may feel tired of waiting, tired of praying the same prayers, tired of hoping without clarity. I am not delayed. I am deliberate. I know exactly what you need and when you need it. Nothing in your life has escaped my attention. Not one concern, not one bill, not one sleepless night. I am not withholding from you to test your faith. I am shaping your trust so that when provision comes, it does not replace me. I want your heart free, free from anxiety, free from control, free from the belief that you must carry tomorrow before it arrives. Bring me your worries without filtering them. Bring me your needs without shame. I am not offended by your dependence. I welcome it. I am a father who knows how to give good gifts, and I give them in ways that protect your heart. You do not need to prove that you trust me. Trust grows as you walk with me honestly. Let me guide your steps. Let me calm your fears. Let me redefine what safety truly means. Safety is not found in what you store up. It is found in knowing who walks with you. I am with you in this season. I will not leave you. I will not abandon you. I will provide what obedience requires and sustain you where faith is growing. Keep walking, keep trusting, keep listening. I am faithful, and I will take care of you. Lord Jesus, we come before you now with hearts quieted and open. After hearing your words, after feeling truth touch places we did not know how to name, we choose to surrender again. Not out of fear, not out of pressure, but out of trust. We place in your hands our relationship with money, work, and provision. Heal what has been shaped by fear. Cleanse what has been marked by guilt. Restore what has been driven by survival instead of trust. We release the need to control outcomes and receive the grace to walk in obedience, one step at a time. Jesus, align our hearts with your will. Teach us to see provision not as a master, but as a servant. Not as a source of identity, but as a tool for purpose. Free us from anxiety about tomorrow and ground us in faith for today. Where fear of lack has ruled, establish peace. Where pressure has exhausted us, restore rest. We surrender our work to you. May it no longer be driven by fear or comparison, but become an offering of worship. Give us integrity in our decisions, wisdom in our stewardship, and humility in every season. Protect our souls from prosperity that would pull us away from you, and from scarcity that would make us doubt your care. We trust you with our needs. We trust you with our future. We trust you with what we have and with what we lack. Teach us to depend on you daily, not on certainty, not on numbers, not on control. Thank you for being a faithful Father. Thank you for seeing what we carry and walking with us patiently. We choose to remain in you, knowing that as we do, provision will come in its time, in its measure, and in a way that brings peace, not fear. Receive our lives once again. Lead us, shape us, use us for your purposes. We rest in you. We trust you. We follow you. Amen.